At this point, I do like to invite Steve Rossi over. Dr. Steve Rossi is the Chief Scientific Officer for PSC Partners Seeking a Cure. Dr. Rossi had worked with patients in chronic liver disease over 30 years as a clinician and also as a researcher. For the past 20 years, he's focused on development of new drugs for different liver diseases, including PSC, before he crossed over to the patient advocacy side of his work. He brings a wealth of experience in clinical research and helps lead PSC Partners research programs that Jasmine outlined earlier, including this large WIND PSC database study, the International Collaborative Research Network, and the PSC Partners Research and Grant Program that drives so many research internationally, and he supports PSC Partners in all aspects of their program. So Steve would be my co-moderator. Also to the stage, I would like to invite Dr. Bowlus again, Benjamin from Ipsen, and Darren from Mirum. Additionally, I'm going to invite over Ann Tahara. Joanne is a patient of mine with PSC for the past, would you say, like 14 years since I started the program, and she's participated in multiple clinical trials in PSC and has a lot to share to patients, providers, and researchers. So thanks for joining us. So I'm going to open up the stage to Steve, Dr. Rossi, to give us an overview of some of the research program PSC Partners is conducting at this point. So Steve.
Thank you, Kidist. I now, after Dr. Bowlus, take over being the oldest one on the panel. Been around. I don't think your mic is working.
Your mic?
I don't have a mic.
Oh, we need to give Steve a mic?
Are we good now? Yeah. There we go. Well, listen, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here, both as I'm from the Bay Area, so it's always nice to come back, and also been very close with Kidist, Chris, and the various providers through the years, both working on the clinical side, but also helping to find cures for PSC and other liver diseases. Really what we want to move on to today is we heard a lot about the drugs, but I think all of you want to understand, how do I become, where's my voice in clinical research and clinical trials? You've heard about how the patient is an important driver for what we do, but there's many ways you can get involved. But some of it is also advocating for yourself to be a part of research and looking for those opportunities. PSC Partners has a lot of programs that hopefully are ways you can participate in addition to the clinical trials that both Kidist and Chris run at their sites. Now, we've heard a lot of this today of the challenges of developing drugs for PSC, and it is daunting. We've been doing this for quite some time, but I think most of us feel we're right on the precipice of making some big changes. But when you look at some of the challenges, we've heard about the biology and the targets not being easily identified. The time frame to seeing some of the events is long, so the studies tend to be longer, despite us wanting something to happen faster. The biomarker piece keeps coming up over and over. We are doing projects, Chris with some of the, I think the CRISPR study and KLID, and then the WIND project we have are gathering data to hopefully develop those biomarkers, but we're still a ways away from that. A big challenge, and this is something that you'll all hear about, is many of you may want to be in a clinical trial, but the criteria are often tough. And so recruiting for small patient populations, it's tough to get into studies. And then there's the regulators, which have been some of our challenges, but they really are moving along. The last thing, though, is it's unfortunate, but these trials are long and they take a big investment. And so, frankly, for some of the small companies, it's really tough to stay. We're going to stay in PSC. And I really commend both Mirum and Ipsen for taking that jump to actually go forward, because a lot of companies have started and then jumped out. I've been at several of them that started with some very promising therapies and for various reasons haven't been able to go forward. But the challenges are there, but we really now, I think, are hitting a good stride. And importantly, your voice can really help make a difference. Now, one of the things that is important is actually, have you been even contacted to participate in a clinical trial? So I think when you go to Davis, when you go to CPMC, you're almost always asked about participating in a trial if you're a good candidate. But the majority of patients aren't at sites like Davis and CPMC. They're out there in the IBD community. They're in places maybe where there just isn't the focus. And so the majority of patients aren't even being asked about or being presented that clinical trials are an option. And this came from a survey that we did as part of our patient-focused drug development with the FDA. This is from 800 patients who gave their feedback about clinical trials. And so we learned some really important lessons about that. The guidelines all say every patient should be presented with clinical trials as an option because we don't have a treatment, but it's not happening. And so how do we get that out there to the broader community and actually get patients access to that? Now, how many patients have actually participated in clinical trials? The majority of patients haven't even participated. We're going to hear from Joanne today, who can give us all her experience about the multiple trials and all the things that you've gone through. And there's lots of experience in it, but the small minority of patients have participated. And so how do we open that up and really, again, bring access to that, both from the clinicians thinking about how do we expand access, and also, frankly, for the companies to think differently about how they can get patients who maybe aren't right at a study site. Now, most patients are willing, if you approach them, to participate in trials. So if you actually get in front of a patient and you present them with the different options, it goes down every time with different types of invasive procedures. The more invasive, the more complex the study, the more patients kind of go, maybe I'll wait a bit. But the majority of patients, if you put something in front of them, they do want to participate. So it's, again, connecting the patient and even advocating for yourself, how do I get into a clinical trial? Now, there's many reasons why patients don't participate, and this is, again, from those 800 patients. The biggest one is the unknown. And surprisingly, a lot of us thought it would be liver biopsy or other invasive procedures. It's that I don't know about this drug. What can it do? Does it have safety concerns? So a lot of that is also up to us, like PSC partners, the companies, the clinicians, really to put together education that can really help patients feel comfortable about being in a trial, about the drugs that they're actually being presented with, so that they're not reading a 20-page consent form and reading all these horrible things about a drug, but actually having that communication and discussion with them about in a comfortable way. But there are many reasons why patients don't participate, but they all can be overcome with the right types of communication and intervention. And I think a lot of it's going to also come down to how the companies rethink about doing clinical trials. We've kind of stuck with the same model for so many years. You come to the site, you have to be there every 4, 12, 24 weeks. We have to start. COVID had a lot of bad things, but COVID did a couple of great things. It started thinking about remote clinical trials. How do we get patients who maybe aren't connected but can be seen and participate in certain studies? Or maybe some of the visits can be done remotely, and we're seeing more of that happen. Now, Jasmine brought up our wheel of crazy things that we're trying to do as an organization, and she touched on what these are. But I think it's important to understand that your voice as a patient has shaped every one of these projects that we're working on. The WIN PSC project, which is really trying to actually help and partner with drug companies to accelerate drug development, is actually being run by PSC partners in collaboration with Chris and Kidist and other investigators. But we're driving it, and we actually came up with the funding. We came up with how we were going to execute this, and we're leading it as an organization. We're sort of functioning like a mini dysfunctional biotech company, but we're doing it. And your voice of this being a priority was key. The International Collaborative Research Network, this is where we bring experts, but the patients are sitting at the table to drive what are the priorities for research. And this year, we actually funded a project that was prioritized by the community in funding a blood test for cholangiocarcinoma. The symptom assessment project, been partnering with Dr. Yvonne wonderfully, who will come up and talk more today. But again, the tools that we developed were really driven by what the patients felt were the most important symptoms to happen. The registry we've heard about, which I can't emphasize enough, is such an important piece of you being able to share your experience, but also that experience translates into outcomes and research. We've done a couple of surveys recently, one on cholangiocarcinoma and one on acute cholangitis, and they're now being presented at the medical meetings. And the insights we're getting from those on the patient perspective are key. Just to give an example, we launched these surveys through the registry, and within weeks we get 400 to 600 responses. It's huge, the type of data that we're getting. We're actually launching one right now about cholecystectomy, looking about the impact of gallbladder removal and what that looks like for outcomes, symptoms, variety of things. And we actually just launched it a week ago, and Brian, we're up to what, 250, 300 responses already. So your voice, your activity is an important piece of research. Don't underestimate that you are just a participant. You are an influencer, and you should be advocating for yourself to be a part of research, but also bring your voice forward through all the different ways. And we definitely want you to share that with us in how we drive research forward. So I think we're going to turn over to kind of address some of the comments and questions that came up here, and how can we improve on some of the clinical trials and participation down the line. So thank you.